6:58 a.m. a weekday morning in Aurora, Colorado. A line of unmarked federal vehicles rolled to a stop outside a quiet suburban house on a street where nothing ever happened. Special agents from the FBI's Dallas field office and investigators from the United States Postal Service Office of Inspector General walked to the door in the gray light, a search warrant folded in a jacket pocket. Inside, on shelves and in drawers and in a closet most homeowners use for coats and boxes, agents found something that does not belong in the home of a mid-level government employee on a public salary. They found cash, bundled, banded, more than $300,000 of it. The man who lived there had a job title so boring it was almost a disguise. Senior network analyst. The kind of words that end a conversation at a dinner party. But that dull title sat on top of something the people stacking the cash understood perfectly, and that almost no one outside the building ever thinks about. It sat on top of authority, the quiet authority to influence which companies the United States Postal Service paid to move the nation's mail. This is the file the government kept sealed until the last plea was entered and the last sentence was read into the record in a federal courtroom in Texas. Every day, roughly 160 million pieces of mail move through the Postal Service. Letters, packages, medications, benefit checks, ballots, the ordinary paper circulation of an entire country. 31,000 post offices, more than 200,000 vehicles, hundreds of thousands of employees. It is so large that the individual people inside it become invisible. And inside that invisibility, 4 people built a machine that quietly sold a piece of the system to the highest bidder. How the FBI found a bribery scheme buried inside one of the oldest and most trusted institutions in America. And the single thread in a spreadsheet that pulled the whole thing apart starts not with a robbery, but with a contract. To understand what these men were actually selling, you have to understand what a Postal Service contract is. The Postal Service does not own enough trucks to move all of its own mail. It never has. For huge stretches of the country, the actual hauling, the long highway runs between processing plants, the regional routes that feed the post offices, is done by private trucking companies under contract. These are called surface transportation contracts, and they are worth collectively billions of dollars a year. For a regional trucking company, winning one is not a nice piece of business. It is the difference between a company that survives and a company that grows, because a postal contract is steady, federally funded, and renews. The customer is the United States government, and the United States government always pays. So there is real money on the table, and where there is real money awarded by a process, there is a process that can be bent. On paper, the process is clean. A contract opportunity is posted. Companies bid. Their bids are evaluated against criteria: price, capacity, reliability, past performance. The best value wins. The system is designed so that no single person can simply hand a contract to a friend. It is designed to be competitive, documented, and fair. But every system designed by people is run by people. And somewhere inside the machinery that turns a bid into an award sits a person who understands the criteria, who knows how the evaluation really works, who knows which boxes matter and which are formalities. That person does not have a button that says award contract. What that person has is something subtler, and in the right hands, just as valuable. Influence, the ability to guide, the ability to advise a company on exactly what to say, exactly how to position itself, exactly which weakness to fix before the people in the evaluation room ever see the file. That is what was for sale, not a signature. A thumb on the scale applied from the inside, invisible to everyone outside the room. To see how small and how decisive that thumb really is, picture the evaluation itself. A contract opportunity goes out. 4, 5, 6 companies submit bids, pages of pricing, equipment lists, safety records, route plans. A handful of people inside the building score them against the criteria. In a fair process, the company that scores highest wins, and no one outside the room could have predicted which one it would be. Now change one thing. Suppose one of those bidders had been told quietly, weeks in advance, exactly what the evaluators would weigh most heavily this time. Suppose it had been coached on which number to sharpen, which weakness to paper over, which box the scorers cared about, and which they would skim. Suppose someone on the inside, when the file came across the table, was inclined to read its strengths generously and its gaps charitably. None of that is a forged document. None of it is a fake bid. Every page is real. The company genuinely can do the work. But the contest was decided before it started, and the 4 honest bidders never knew they were running a race that had already been called. That is the entire art of it. The corruption hides inside a process that, examined page by page, looks completely clean. The man with his thumb on the scale was named Zechariah Yai. He was in his early 40s. He had worked his way into the Postal Service's procurement architecture and earned the title of Senior Network Analyst, a role that gave him a working seat near the decisions about which carriers received which service contracts. He understood the system the way only someone who has lived inside it for years can. He knew which contracts required full open competition and which had more room to maneuver. He knew how evaluations were scored. He knew what a trucking company needed to demonstrate and who it needed to satisfy to come out of the process favorably. On a federal salary, that knowledge made him a respectable middle-class living. Sold privately, it was worth far more. He was not alone. A second Postal Service employee, also based in the Aurora area, also with a working knowledge of how procurement decisions were really made, was willing to put that knowledge to the same use. His name was Tyrone Rowe. Together, Yai and Rowe had something genuinely valuable and genuinely sellable, a combined, inside understanding of how a trucking company could be steered toward winning federal contracts and the internal relationships to make that steering real. What they needed was a buyer, someone on the outside with trucking companies that could actually do the work, and a willingness to pay for an advantage that no honest competitor could ever match, because no honest competitor even knew the advantage existed. They found two. The buyers were brothers. Juan Jin-Yun, 51, ran a trucking operation out of Plano, Texas. His brother, Hong Jin-Yun, 48, ran one out of Denver, Colorado. Between them, they had the kind of regional footprint that is built to bid on postal work. Trucks, drivers, yards, the operational capacity to actually move freight on a schedule. On the open market, they were one of dozens of qualified companies competing for the same routes, with no particular reason to win and every reason to lose to someone cheaper or larger. What the brothers understood, what makes this case a case rather than ordinary business, is that they did not have to be the best company on paper. They only had to know the right people inside the building and be willing to pay them. An arrangement like this does not begin with an envelope of cash slid across a table. It begins with something far more ordinary and far harder to see, a relationship. A conversation at the edge of a legitimate business meeting. A favor that is the first time almost innocent. A word of advice, a heads up about a timeline, a hint that a particular contract is worth bidding on. The first favor is free or close to it, and it works. The company wins something it might not have won. And once that has happened once, the line that used to feel solid, the line between helpful and corrupt, has already been crossed quietly, in the dark with no one quite naming it. The second favor has a price. By the time real money is moving, everyone involved has long since stopped pretending it is anything other than what it is. That is how good people and ordinary businesses end up inside a federal indictment. Not with a single dramatic decision to become criminals, but with a series of small steps, each one only slightly worse than the last, until they look up and find they have built a machine. The arrangement that came together was, in its structure, almost corporate. The Yun brothers' companies would receive guidance and internal influence from Yai and Rowe that no outside bidder could replicate. In exchange, money would flow the other direction. Kickbacks, paid quietly from the trucking companies back to the Postal Service employees whose help had made the contracts possible. The price of the key was about $1.5 million. The doors it opened were worth about $15 million. Hold that ratio for a moment, because it is the engine of the entire scheme, and we will come back to what it really means. Here is the uncomfortable part, the part that should bother anyone who assumes a thing this large would be obvious. For a long time, it worked, and it looked like nothing. That is the genius of an inside job in a giant institution. A robbery leaves a hole, a burglary leaves a broken window. This left a contract, a perfectly ordinary, fully documented, government-approved contract, awarded to a perfectly real trucking company that owned perfectly real trucks and did the work it was paid to do. The mail got moved, the routes got run. On the surface, the Postal Service got exactly what it paid for. The corruption was not in the work. The corruption was in the decision. Somewhere upstream, in a room where a winner was chosen, the choice had been bought before it was made. And a bought decision does not look any different from the outside than an honest one. The truck on the highway looks the same either way. This is why public corruption cases are some of the hardest cases the FBI builds. There is no body, no broken safe, no stolen car to find. There is only a pattern, a faint statistical wrongness in a sea of legitimate transactions, and a paper trail that has been deliberately structured to look like ordinary commerce. To prove a bribe, you cannot just show that a company won a contract. Companies win contracts every day. You have to show that money moved in the other direction because of it, and that everyone involved knew exactly what that money was for. For a while, no one was looking. Why would they be? The contracts were valid, the companies were real. The money the brothers paid did not move as a single suspicious lump with a label on it. It moved the way dirty money always moves, broken up, disguised, folded into the ordinary cash flow of running a business. And the people taking it were careful. A senior network analyst who has spent years inside a procurement system knows better than almost anyone exactly what an auditor looks for. He knows which thresholds trigger a review and which transactions slip beneath them. The same expertise that let Yai bend the contracts let him hide the payments. So the scheme grew. Contract by contract, the Yoon brothers' companies won work they should have had to fight for. Payment by payment, money flowed back to the men inside. $15 million in federal contracts, funded entirely by American taxpayers who believed reasonably that their postal service awarded its business on merit. It did not, and for a long stretch, no one knew. There is nothing new about this crime. The bribing of the people who hand out government work is one of the oldest offenses against any state that buys things. And the United States Postal Service, precisely because it is so large and so woven into daily life, has always been a tempting target. It spends enormous sums on contracts. It runs on a sprawling internal bureaucracy where authority is necessarily delegated down to specialists, people like a senior network analyst, because no one at the top can personally evaluate every route in every region. That delegation is not a flaw. It is the only way an institution that size can function. But every place authority is delegated is a place trust is extended, and every extension of trust is a door. Most of the people standing at those doors are honest, and the doors stay shut. It takes only one who is not, in the right position with the right buyer, to turn a door into a toll booth. The size that makes the Postal Service essential is the same size that makes a single corrupt node so hard to see. If you have ever wondered how something like this stays invisible inside an agency with hundreds of thousands of employees, sit with that question, because it is the real question of this case. Is it that the sheer scale of the institution creates blind spots that no oversight can fully cover? Or is it that the procurement process itself has gaps that an insider knows exactly how to slip through? The honest answer, the one the investigators landed on, is that it is both, and that the two feed each other. The bigger the system, the more decisions it makes, the more places there are for a single corrupt decision to hide. A trucking contract in Aurora, Colorado is a grain of sand on a very long beach. Nobody is standing over it. The oversight that exists is built to catch the obvious, the missing money, the fake company, the no-show contractor. It is not naturally built to catch a real company doing real work after a real decision that happened to be purchased. Which means the thing that finally exposed this was not a guard or a gate or a rule. It was a person who looked at the beach long enough to notice that one patch of sand kept forming the same shape. The thread came out of the data, somewhere in the layered oversight of federal contracting. Between the Postal Service's own internal watchdog, the Office of Inspector General, and the federal agents who chase financial crime, someone was doing the unglamorous, essential work of looking at contract award patterns. Not chasing a tip, not following an informant, just reading the record the way a forensic accountant reads a ledger, looking for the place where the numbers stopped behaving the way numbers should, and the numbers were not behaving. In a fair, competitive process, contract awards scatter. Different companies win different routes. Pricing varies. The winners look random in the way that genuine competition is random. But when a process has been quietly captured, the randomness disappears. The same companies keep winning. The awards cluster in a way that competition alone does not explain. To a trained eye, a captured contract stream has a signature, and the signature is consistency where there should be noise. That is the anomaly that surfaced. Certain trucking companies were winning postal work in a pattern that was a little too clean, a little too repeatable, to be the product of open competition. It was not proof of anything, it was a question. But it was exactly the kind of question that turns a pile of paperwork into an investigation. Consider what the analyst is actually looking at, because it explains why this kind of crime is so rarely caught and so hard to hide once someone is genuinely looking. A captured contract stream betrays itself in small statistical tells. The same winners recur more often than chance allows. The spread between the winning bid and the runners-up tightens in a way honest competition does not produce, as if someone always knew exactly how much room they had. Award timing lines up a little too neatly with other events. None of these tells is a smoking gun on its own. Each has an innocent explanation, and a good defense lawyer can supply one for any single anomaly. But they accumulate. Put enough faintly wrong numbers next to each other, and the innocent explanation stops stacking. Probability itself becomes a witness. The pattern does not prove who did it or why, but it points, with a steadiness that is hard to argue with, at the conclusion that somewhere this process was no longer random, and that someone was making it unrandom on purpose. Someone decided to pull the thread. The case was built by the FBI's Dallas field office, working hand in hand with the Postal Service's Office of Inspector General, the agency's own internal corruption hunters. It was a joint operation, federal law enforcement on one side and the institution's own watchdog on the other. And that pairing matters. The Inspector General's people understood the procurement system from the inside. They knew how a contract was supposed to move and could therefore see, precisely, where this one had moved wrong. The FBI brought the muscle of a federal criminal investigation, the subpoenas, the financial analysis, the ability to follow money across companies and accounts and turn a suspicious pattern into a provable crime. And they built it the way every serious financial fraud case is built, not with a dramatic raid, with patience, transaction by transaction, contract by contract, payment by payment. They started with the contracts that had triggered the question and worked backward and outward. Who evaluated them? Who influenced them? Who had access to the criteria before the bids came in? They mapped the relationships, who knew whom, who had spoken to whom, which internal employees kept appearing near the decisions that benefited the same outside companies. Then they followed the money the other way. Because a bribe has two halves, and the half that convicts you is not the favor. Favors are deniable. The half that convicts you is the payment. The agents traced the cash flowing out of the Young Brothers trucking companies and looked for where it landed. They were not looking for a single wire labeled bribe. No one labels it. They were looking for money that left the companies and arrived, by whatever disguised path, in the lives of two Postal Service employees who had no honest reason to be receiving it. This is slow, document-heavy, deeply unglamorous work. There are no car chases in a procurement fraud case. There is a conference room and boxes of records, and analysts cross-referencing contract dates against payment dates, against bank records, against internal emails, building a timeline so tight that coincidence stops being a possible explanation. The goal is a single undeniable picture. This payment to this person because of this contract. It is worth respecting how much patience that takes, because patience is the actual weapon in a case like this. The temptation, once investigators suspect what is happening, is to move, to confront, to interview, to seize. But move too early and you have a suspicion and nothing more. The targets lawyer up, the money stops flowing, the trail goes cold, and a real scheme walks free because you reached for it before it was provable. So the agents wait. They let the picture develop at the speed the records allow. They pull bank statements and read them line by line. They map who emailed whom and when. They lay the contract awards along a timeline and lay the payments along the same timeline and watch, month by month, for the two lines to start moving together. The work looks like accounting because it is accounting. But it is accounting aimed at a courtroom, and every reconciled figure is one more thing a defense lawyer will not be able to explain away. The case is not won in a dramatic moment. It is won in the slow accumulation of facts that, taken together, leave exactly one possible story. And slowly that picture came together. The mechanics, once the investigators reconstructed them, were almost elegantly simple. Yai and Ro used their positions to help the Young Brothers companies win Postal Service contracts. Not through open advocacy that anyone could see, but through the quiet application of inside access. Confidential guidance on how the procurement process actually worked, internal influence over how things were weighed, the kind of help no outside competitor could replicate because no outside competitor even knew it was happening. In return, money moved back, roughly $1.5 million in kickbacks, flowing from the trucking companies to the two employees whose help had secured roughly $15 million in contracts, $10 in government business for every dollar paid. Stop on that number because it is the cold heart of the case. A 10-to-1 return is not a tip. It is not a gratuity slipped to a helpful clerk. It is an investment with a return so good that no legitimate market offers anything close to it. And the reason it could offer that return is that the cost was not really paid by the brothers or by Yai or by Ro. It was paid by everyone else. By the honest trucking companies that lost work they had fairly earned. By the Postal Service, which paid for influence it should have received for free. By the taxpayers who funded $15 million in contracts on the belief that the awards were honest. Every bribery scheme is, at its core, a transfer. Someone gets a benefit cheaply, and the true cost is scattered across thousands of people who never see the bill. The genius of it, and the cruelty of it, is that the victim is everyone, and therefore feels like no one. And there were victims with faces, even if no one ever called them that. For every contract the Young Brothers companies won through the inside track, there was an honest trucking company that lost. Somewhere there were operators who had done everything right, sharpened their pricing, maintained their fleets, built clean safety records, submitted careful and competitive bids, and who came away from the process empty-handed and confused, certain they had put forward a strong offer, unable to understand why they kept falling just short. They were not imagining it. They had been beaten by a race that was fixed before they entered it, and the cruelest part is that they will likely never know. There was no announcement, no scandal that reached them, no letter explaining that the contract they lost had been promised in the dark. They simply lost quietly, again and again, to a competitor whose real advantage was not on any page of its bid. That is the hidden human cost of public corruption. Not just the taxpayer money, but the honest businesses that played by rules everyone else had secretly agreed to ignore. Then there is the money itself, and the physical problem it creates, because a kickback is not just a moral problem for the people taking it. It is a logistics problem. $15 million in contracts generates real revenue, and $1.5 million of it had to travel somehow from the bank accounts of 2 trucking companies into the hands of 2 government employees without leaving an obvious mark. You cannot simply write a check that says bribe. You cannot wire a round number from your company to a postal analyst and expect no one to ever ask why. So the money has to be disguised, broken into smaller pieces, routed through intermediaries, dressed up as something legitimate, or pulled out as cash and handed over in person off the books entirely. Every one of those disguises is a choice, and every choice leaves a trace for someone patient enough to find it. The very effort the conspirators put into hiding the money is the effort that, reconstructed later, becomes the clearest evidence of guilt, because honest payments do not need to be hidden, and the elaborate machinery of concealment only exists when there is something to conceal. While the financial picture sharpened, the investigators were doing the other half of the work, turning a pattern into testimony and a paper trail into a case a prosecutor could take into a courtroom. This is where the discipline of the investigation paid off, because the agents had not rushed, because they had built the timeline transaction by transaction. The case they assembled was not a theory, it was a reconstruction. They could lay the contract awards on a table and lay the kickback payments beside them and show how one tracked against the other, how the money outmoved in time with the contracts in. They could show the internal access, they could show the relationships, they could show the gap between what the rules said should have happened in the evaluation room and what actually happened. A forensic reconstruction like that is one of the cleaner things a financial crime unit can build, and it has a particular effect on the people it is built against. A defendant can fight a witness. A defendant can argue with an informant, call him a liar buying his freedom. It is much harder to argue with your own bank records laid against your own contract files on a federal timeline. The numbers do not have a motive, they simply are, and there was the cash. Somewhere in the investigation, federal agents seized more than $300,000 in physical currency, money that does not appear, banded and bundled, in the home and the holdings of a public employee unless something has gone very wrong. Cash is the hardest thing in a bribery case to explain away. A favor can be reframed as friendship. A payment can be dressed up as a loan or a consulting fee. But $350,000 in seized cash, sitting in a federal evidence room, is a fact with no innocent story attached to it. When the full picture was finally laid on the table, the contracts, the payments, the access, the timeline, the cash, 4 people looked at what the government had built against them and made the only rational calculation left. They decided not to fight it. The guilty pleas came in sequence, in order of how central each person had been to the machine. Zechariah Yai, the senior network analyst whose inside position made the entire scheme possible, pleaded guilty to receiving a bribe by a public official. It is one of the most serious charges available against a federal employee who corrupts the procurement process from within, and it fit him precisely, because he was the door. Without his access and his authority, there was nothing to sell. Tyrone Rowe, the second Postal Service employee whose inside knowledge amplified the scheme, pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit honest services, wire fraud. That phrase, honest services, is worth sitting with. The law recognizes that when you hold a position of public trust, the public is entitled to your honest service, your judgment, undistorted by a secret payment. To sell that judgment is to defraud the public of something it owns. Rowe had sold it. It is worth understanding why the charge takes that exact shape, because it is the legal tool built precisely for crimes like this one. Ordinary fraud requires a victim who was tricked out of money or property, but the public official who takes a bribe has not, in the simple sense, stolen anything from the citizen on the street. the citizens still got their mail. What was stolen was the official's honest judgment, which the law treats as something the public owns. Honest services fraud exists to name that theft. The deprivation of your right to have public servants make decisions on the merits, not on the basis of a secret payment. And the word wire is not decoration. Federal jurisdiction often hangs on it. The moment any part of the scheme travels across an ordinary wire, an email, a transfer, a phone call that crosses a state line, it becomes a federal wire fraud matter, and the full weight of a federal investigation can come down on it. A scheme run by people who imagined they were operating in a small, local, invisible corner of a procurement office had, with every electronic message and every transfer, been quietly writing itself into federal jurisdiction the entire time. The same charge, conspiracy to commit honest services wire fraud, was entered by both brothers, Wan Jin-yoon, the Plano operator, and Hong Jin-yoon, the Denver operator, the men who had paid to buy what honest competition was supposed to provide. 4 defendants, 4 guilty pleas, no trial. The evidence assembled over a year-long joint investigation between the FBI and the Postal Service's Inspector General was complete enough, and tight enough that contesting it was not a strategy. It was a way to add time to a sentence. Sentencing came in 2 sessions, on consecutive days in late March of 2026, before a United States District Judge in the Northern District of Texas. The sentences were handed down in order of culpability, the law's attempt to assign, in months, a measure of how much of the damage each person owned. Zechariah Yai received 42 months, 3.5 years. The architect, the man whose access and authority made everything else possible, drew the longest term, as the law intends, because the person who sells the public trust they were given is, in the eyes of the system, the most culpable of all. Tyrone Rowe received 30 months, 2.5 years, the second insider whose knowledge amplified the scheme. Wan Jin-yoon received 24 months, 2 years, the Plano trucking company owner who paid to obtain what competition should have provided. Hong Jin-yoon received 3 months. His role, the court found, had been the least central of the 4. Added together, 99 months of federal prison time, distributed across 4 people who had built a bribery operation inside one of the most trusted institutions in the country and run it long enough to corrupt $15 million in contracts. And then the forfeiture. The defendants agreed to surrender more than $300,000 in cash, the currency federal agents had seized during the investigation, along with 2 vehicles. The cash went back to the federal government. The vehicles, quiet trophies of the years when the kickbacks were flowing, went with it. But here's where the case opens up into something larger than 4 sentences and a pile of returned cash. And it is worth being honest about, because it is the part the headline never carries. Look at the math again. $15 million in corrupted contracts, $1.5 million in kickbacks, $300,000 recovered. The government got back $300,000 from a scheme that moved $15 million. That gap is not a failure of the investigation. The investigation was methodical, coordinated, and completely successful. It identified the scheme, proved it, and put 4 people in federal prison. The gap is a feature of how these cases actually resolve. And understanding why is the difference between feeling cheated by the outcome and understanding it. Forfeiture recovers what agents can trace and prove at the moment the case is resolved. They seized the cash that was still sitting there. They took the vehicles that could be tied to the proceeds. But the primary asset of this scheme was never a pile of cash in a closet. The primary asset was the contracts themselves. And the contracts had already been executed. The trucks had already run. The mail had already moved. The Postal Service had already paid $15 million to companies that did in fact deliver the freight. You cannot unhaul a year of mail. You cannot claw back $15 million of work that was actually performed, even if the right to perform it was bought with a bribe. So the money the government recovers in a case like this is almost never the money the scheme generated. It is the residue, the cash that hadn't been spent, the assets that hadn't been hidden, the proceeds careless or recent enough to still be sitting where agents could reach them. The rest is gone, dissolved into the ordinary economy, spent and respent until it can no longer be traced or proven. The accountability is real. It is measured in prison time, in criminal records, in careers ended and trust destroyed. But the financial recovery is partial almost by design. And anyone who tells you a corruption case ends with the books balanced is selling you a comfort that does not exist. There is a question buried in this case that does not have a clean answer, and the people who work these cases argue about it too. Was this justice, calibrated correctly? 99 months combined for a scheme that cost American taxpayers $15 million in corrupted contracts. 42 months at the top for the man who sold the public's trust. 3 months at the bottom, for the brother whose role was smallest. Is that the right shape? Does the punishment fit a crime whose victim is everyone and no one, whose damage is real but diffuse, whose harm you cannot point to the way you can point to a stolen car or an emptied bank account? There is no satisfying answer, and that is exactly why public corruption is so corrosive. A violent crime announces itself. This kind of crime hides inside the ordinary functioning of a system you are supposed to be able to trust, and it asks you to believe that the next contract and the one after that were decided honestly, that the room was clean. Most of the time it is. The entire system runs on the assumption that the people in the evaluation room are doing their honest jobs, and almost always they are. But a case like this is a reminder that the assumption is exactly that, an assumption, and that the distance between a clean decision and a bot, one is invisible from the outside. The officials who announced the case understood this, even if you have to read their statements carefully to hear it. The United States Attorney called the outcome a warning to anyone contemplating the same thing. The FBI's special agent in charge in Dallas said the defendants had fraudulently secured government contracts by paying kickbacks to employees who misused positions of trust. The Postal Service's Inspector General said plainly that employees who commit serious offenses will be aggressively investigated and prosecuted. These are statements of resolve. They are also, if you listen closely, admissions. Because the vulnerability that Yai and Roe exploited is not unique to them, and it did not end when they were sentenced. It exists wherever the authority to award contracts is concentrated in a few individuals without enough independent verification standing behind them. It exists wherever the gap between what the rules say should happen and what actually happens in the evaluation room is wide enough for a kickback to fit through. Here is what stays with me about this file, after the sentences and the forfeiture and the press statements. The only thing that separated this scheme from running undetected indefinitely was that someone, somewhere in the layered oversight of federal contracting, looked at the contract award data long enough to notice that the pattern was wrong. Not a confession, not a tip from an angry insider, not a bag of cash that fell out of a truck. A pattern in a spreadsheet, spotted by a person trained to find the place where the numbers stop being random. Pull that one person out of the story, and the trucks keep running, the contracts keep flowing, the money keeps moving back the other way. And 4 people grow quietly wealthy on a public institution while the rest of the country mails its letters and trusts that the system works. That is the thin line this case is really about, not the prison time, the catch. A $15 million corruption of the United States mail came undone because the consistency was a little too consistent, and one analyst on the right side of the ledger noticed. And somewhere right now, inside a system far too large for any one person to watch, another decision is being made in another evaluation room. Almost certainly it is honest. The entire country is built on the wager that it is. Most of the time that wager pays. This is the file about one of the times it didn't, and about the thin, patient, unglamorous line of people whose entire job is to notice when the numbers stop telling the truth. The mail is still moving. Somewhere, an analyst is still reading the data. And that, in the middle of a system most people never think about, is what accountability actually looks like.